Hey everyone, and welcome to the Disability Unite Festival panel on folks who are blind or low vision. My name is Chancey Fleet. I'm the Assistive Technology Coordinator at the Andrew Haskell Braille and Talking Book Library, a proud branch of the New York Public Library, where I run a free tech coaching service and the Dimensions Lab for the creation of accessible graphics and 3D models. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to four of my colleagues today. And we're doing the panel together. So first up, we have Bobby Pompey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bobby Pompey. I teach independent living skills at the San Francisco Lighthouse for the Blind, and I'm also an adjunct faculty member in the San Francisco State Department for Teachers of the Visually Impaired and Orientation and Mobility Specialist. And next, we'll hear from Sherry.
Everybody, my name is Sherry Wells Jensen. I am a professor of linguistics at Bowling Green State University in beautiful and swampy Bowling Green, Ohio. Um, and my research interests are in astrobiology and disability studies, and I run our linguistics program at BGSU. And let me think, Abhita Sugupta, I think you're next.
So, hi everyone, this is Sugandha Gupta here. I'm originally from India and currently I'm the assistant professor of fashion design and social justice at Parsons School of Design. I also am a textile and fiber artist and maker, and of course, a disability advocate. I teach courses in sensory design and tactile graphics and disability studies, and I'm going to pass it on to Min.
This is Minha. I am the Assistant Technology Manager at Perkins School for the Blind. Uh, very proudly, the first school for the blind in the country. And I'm also an accessibility and accessible technology advocate. I'm really excited to be here to share with you all of the experiences from this panel for Disability Pride Month. And I'm kicking off our conversation on a really special and really close topic to my heart, community and culture in the blind and low vision community. Um, so for me, I became blind when I was 7. I grew up in Vietnam, and I feel like in my culture, family, and community are super important. Everybody comes together to help. And when my family went through really awful attack and I became blind, I'm also a burn survivor, the community really came together and lifted us up and really helped us. And I really bring this mindset to my identity as a blind and disabled woman, and also very, interconnected to that as my identity as an Asian blind disabled woman. And when I came to the US, I had a lot of blind and low vision mentors who really brought me under their wing and really helped me to form my identity as a blind person, as a proud blind person. Um, and I feel like in all of my work, professionally and personally, I really bring this spirit of community to everything that I do because it is so important to have a community, to have a group of people that you can rely on for anything disability related. And I think it's really crucial for young blind children, but also adults losing their vision to know that they have a community, that they have a space where they belong and where they are celebrated. I'm going to pass it on to Sagunda.
Thanks, Min. That was really wonderful, and I loved hearing about your experiences. So, I would say for me, blindness and low vision is a part of my life and has always been. I'm a person with albinism, so growing up in India, I always stood out of the crowd because I don't look like anybody in my community. I'm a white appearing woman with platinum blonde hair, and I have very pale skin and violet eyes. And so it was always kind of like I was always kind of living on the periphery. And of course, because I'm legally blind, I never had access to accommodations growing up in school. And so that kind of really was a big part of my life, just to try to figure out how to navigate creating access to education, creating access to art, because art was something that I was really always passionate about. And I think now that I'm a professor and I'm teaching courses in disability studies and I've developed my own body of work, I've learned a lot about the gain that comes through blindness and disability, especially like quoting Georgina Klieg here. And I think that there's so much beauty and opportunity for innovation and ingenuity that just comes through blindness and low vision. I also want to point out that being surrounded by more blind people of different types of spectrum of blindness is just so inviting in terms of what those different perspectives teach me and help me learn about just how different, in different ways, we all perceive and gain knowledge and gain access to knowledge and also contribute our own perspectives. So I'll stop there and I'll pass it on to Bobby.
Thank you. When I think about this question and I think about blindness and community and identity, the language nerd in me really hones in on the use of the word blindness. Um, and I think about my journey as growing up as someone who was low vision and now is totally blind. And I can't help but think about the power of connecting to the word blind specifically and how that unlocked a lot of community just through that particular identity. And so for most of my life, I didn't know that there were other people out there like me. And I was kind of this only lonely, as you might hear in certain circles. And that was pretty isolating for me. And I didn't really know what to do with that. And so I was trying to kind of fit a square peg into a round hole, or if it's vice versa, forgive me. But whatever that expression is. But once I realized there were other people like me, and that it was okay to call myself blind despite however much I could see. And I found other community out there. I got so much power in my confidence, in my skills that I learned from those folks, in the experiences that they shared and that I was able to share. And then ultimately in what I am able to give back to my community. And I think those experiences have really shaped who I am as a woman and who I am as a really strong member of the blindness community. And so when I think about that question, that whole experience is what is top of mind. So what do you think of, Sherry?
This question, I love this question because it's always what I say to people whenever somebody asks me, "What's the most important thing? What do you need?" My first thing is always, "Well, where's your community? Where are your people? That's your strength. Find it. Start there." But growing up as a blind kid in this small town, I didn't have any blind teachers. I didn't know any real kick-ass blind people, and so I had really good skills. I learned to use a cane. I learned to use Braille, but I sort of took those as kind of my hack into the sighted world so that I didn't have to be different. And so all of my fight as a kid growing up was don't nothing, nothing, nothing. Don't do blindness stuff at me. Yes, I read Braille. I don't know. It's just a thing. Don't pay too much attention to it. And so I used the skills that I had to do as much blending in. And so if you would say had said blind community to me as a kid growing up, I would have been like, nah, nah, let's don't do that because that's going to be a limit and that's going to be a bad thing. Having, drunk the cultural Kool-Aid about disability, right? And then, then when I grew up and maybe got some more sense about me, I suddenly realized that I had this desperate, almost hunger for the company of people who were moving through life in the same way that I'm moving through life, and not just how do you do the specific thing? What's your genius hack for this street corner? But just how do you be emotionally, spiritually, physically, how are you a human in these circumstances? And can we please be friends? I feel like whenever I meet a group of cool blind people, the first thing I want to be is like 6 years old on the playground and saying, can we please be friends? Because I need you guys. I need to learn. I just feel when I'm in a community of blind people, I just abruptly feel this weight that I didn't know I was carrying get sort of swept away for a few minutes. And I feel happy and excited and inquisitive. Um, and it's a power, it's an untapped resource that I didn't know about when I was a kid. Uh, I think, what about you, Chansey? I'm eager to hear what you have to say.
So I had kind of a similar trajectory to you in that I grew up blind with quote unquote good skills, whatever that means. Usually it means that sighted adults are really impressed, which is not always the best thing for a child. Um, and I grew up without a whole bunch of blind people around to learn from and sort of calibrate by. And then when I started working in activism and being a member of the NFB, I really identified strongly and quickly with this idea of blindness as strength and the power of alternative techniques and the primacy of and legitimacy of non-visual ways of doing things. Um, and that has really shaped my career and my identity and the things that I'm proud of. I really do look at the blind community as a source of wisdom and usually the quickest way to learn how to negotiate a situation or to do a complicated thing, whether it's art or turning wood or using some kind of a power tool, whatever it is. I want another blind person to show me most of the time because that's where the non-visual expertise is. Um, what I'll say has come to me later, and probably because of my work in the library, is I really used to define myself in opposition to people who had low vision or had vision loss or saw themselves as visually impaired or some other thing. I think among people who pride themselves on non-visual skills, like they feel very hard won and they feel very important because they are. And then among people who would identify as having vision loss, um, often that feels like a very emotional experience. There is some loss there. There's some grief there. Um, that group of people is processing maybe feelings of shame and transition that I never had to go through. And they're processing learning Braille and switching to reading with text to speech in a different way. Um, but what I've realized being at the library is that we have so much to teach each other, those two groups. I can tell you anything about Braille and technology and growing up as a cane user. And that group of people can tell me things that I've missed out on visuals. Like they deeply understand perspective. They understand some things about the sighted world, maybe that I don't. And if we can get out of our own heads enough and talk to each other as people and kind of plumb the depths of each other's experience and trust each other enough to do that, I think the hardest thing for me to learn has actually been how to trust people that identify in that way that's very different from the way I do and realize that we are valuable contributors to one another's lives. On that note, yeah, I want to kick it back over to Suganda.
Thanks for saying that, Chansey, because when I just got integrated in the blind community, you were one of the main people that helped me get into the blind community in New York, because in India, I mean, the only person totally blind in my community was my music teacher. So it was different. When you're just with one person, it's very different than when you're part of a broader community. And to me, like, I was never, sorry for digressing and not moving on to the next prompt, but I really wanted to just acknowledge what you said because it's so important for me and it really touches a nerve somewhere in me. And uh, so, like, I always kind of felt like I'm part of nowhere because I don't really identify with the sighted community, because I don't do things like sighted people do. And I don't quite fit in the blind or totally blind community because I'm not totally blind. I have some vision. And I felt that my role in this in between space is just to be a bridge, and because I can understand kind of like a little bit of both sides, because I dabble between both sides. So I really appreciate you saying that. And I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. And with that, I want to move to the next prompt, which is, just kind of reflecting on how technology and tactile solutions empower daily life. And as a artist and as a maker, I feel like I've always been driven towards tactile and auditory modes of learning and making, because that's just more of my strength than my sight. So I think that's kind of just the most cliche way of kicking this conversation off. But as an artist, I feel like the knowledge of materials that comes through touch for me has always uh, has always surprised sighted people around me. When I was working in the industry, a lot of people used to be stunned as to how I can recognize fabrics just by touching them. And I would be like, hey, I'm not going to give you that secret. It's just my little thing that I do, you know? And so that kind of was always part of my life. And now I'm just a champion of, or and an advocate for non-visual design, because I think there's so much richness in the vocabulary of touch and in the vocabulary of different materials. I've brought my class several times to the library, and whenever Chansey brings out the three-dimensional objects that are made with 3D printing, my first instinct is to knock those objects with my nails and try to hear the sound they create and guess the material it is. And it's usually plastic, and we usually have a big laugh about it in my class sessions. So I would say that it even adds a little bit of humor while also adding a rich vocabulary of just understanding materials and the inherent tangible knowledge that comes through those materials. So right now, at the top of my head, that's what I can think of. So how about I pass it on to Min this time?
I love this question. Um, Not just because I work in assistive technology now, but I'm just thinking of how much tech and tactile things have impacted my life and how much I rely on them every single day. Um, More than most people would even think about. Just to give an example, I just checked into my hotel and the toiletries that they provide are all different shapes. And so once I've identified which bottle is the shampoo or which bottle is the conditioner, I'll be able to identify it again next time. Just little hacks like this that blind people have had to kind of devised ourselves in order to make the lack of information more accessible to us. And then in thinking about this question, I'm a 90s baby, so I can't even remember my life without any kind of tech. When I lost my vision in Vietnam, the most high tech equipment that we had at the boys' school that we went to was a Perkins brailler. If you're not familiar with Perkins brailler, I don't know, it's like 8 pounds. It's very heavy, it's very loud, and it's very recognizable to every blind child and adult that have gone through some kind of educational program. And so when I came to the US, I had a whole world open up to me in terms of like computers and refreshable braille displays. And now that I'm working in AT, that realm has really im- improved, in terms of tech and affordability and I think availability as well. Uh, so I'm a staunch advocate of braille and tactile literacy. I use it on a daily basis. I can't imagine doing my work or going through my personal life without it. And I just think back to what everybody has said about the Black community being innovative, like being a source of wisdom. And I think in all of our tech and tactile tools, they most of them have come from a community. Uh, and that's why a community is so important because we learn from each other, we innovate together, we teach each other all of these different tools and skills. I'm going to pass it on to Bobby.
Thank you, man. This topic, I similar to you, I am like, oh, there's so much here. There are so many different tactile and technology solutions that we get to benefit from. The first and foremost and very obvious one being Braille. I will admit that Braille is something I never thought I would use as much as I do. I learned Braille on a whim as my senior project. It's something when I was in high school, everyone had to pick a project that you then wrote a paper about and did a presentation about, and also did kind of like a more physical aspect. So, for example, someone else learned about painting cars, and their actual project is that they painted their car like this beautiful magenta color. But that's neither here nor there. And so I learned Braille as my senior project, and I did my research paper on the genetic condition that I have that is related to my eyes and all the other fun things going on in this body of mine. And I never really thought I'd use it. I was, as I mentioned, low vision at the time, and wrote it off in the way that Braille can be completely written off for low vision folks. And oh my word, I've always used Braille a ton. There are some pretty interesting statistics that say that very few people who are blind or low vision, I think it's around 10%, actually know Braille, but yet those who are employed use it at a really high number. And to kind of see how much I use it for labeling, I use it for just jotting down notes, I use it for more of the kind of spot reading things, but I am always shocked by that. Just never thought I'd see my life going in this direction with Braille. I think about things like what you shared, Min, with just the kind of spotting out tactile features in things, figuring out what products in my life are just based off of the what it feels like, the buttons are, how do I know what this piece of technology is, how it works just based off of getting my hands on it. It's definitely something I do in my teaching of independent living skills all the time. Always talking about what does it feel like if you're cooking something? Can you see that it's done or tell that it's done based on the texture changing a lot? So I think tactile elements in technology can be super duper important for blind and low vision folks. What's your opinion on it, Chancey?
I think I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the moments where I experienced a type of technology for the first time. Not so much the technology itself, as that somebody made a decision to frame something in a certain way for me. So when I was growing up, my parents made sure that I had lots of Braille books and Braille instruction, but they also got like pretty deep with it. My father made me a cuckoo clock, um, and he's a pretty funny guy, so the cuckoo had dark glasses and a little white cane, but it also had bronze braille numbers all around the face, and he made me a box that had my name in braille, and my mom would do Easter egg hunts with me, and I'd have to follow this trail of clues through our little house and around outside, and we had a chicken coop, and sometimes there were clues in there, and they were all in braille, and she'd sighted, but she learned enough braille to not only support me with my education, but make Braille a really fun part of my life. I remember my father making sure that I had a laptop back in the 80s when I was in like kindergarten. I was the only person in elementary school with a laptop. And then I remember later on being like 7 or 8 years old, rolling up on Saturday to the library at Virginia Commonwealth University, and there were no, like, legitimate college students there because it was Saturday. They didn't wanna be at the library, but I did, and the librarians gave me the big old key and said, "Go on back there and let me use the Reading Edge," which was the fancy reading machine that cost tens of thousands of dollars at that time, and I would just spend Saturday afternoon there scanning stuff and reading what I wanted to read, and those experiences, as much as the technology myself, remind me that sometimes it's a friend or a family member, sometimes it's a total stranger that just decides to go that little bit out of their way to make sure that somebody has an experience with technology or braille or a way of doing things. And it's not always easy for me in my career to assess my impact. It's impossible to know what days I've made a big difference for somebody else down the line and what days maybe I haven't. But one thing that I can do is remember that that little extra bit of effort, that little extra bit of fun, choosing the more expansive view of a situation and giving somebody a little bit of extra information or a little bit of extra motivation, if I can find it in myself to do it that day, I'm increasing the odds that I did something that will ripple out. And I don't think I always achieve that, but it's always something that I think about. Sherry, what do you think about?
I was laughing at your story about your dad because my mom was sort of similar. She learned to read and write Braille as a sighted person long before I did. And so she would write me letters when I'd go away, I go to camp, I'd get a postcard like everybody else. I was really always noticed that she took that extra moment. Um, and when I was not a satisfactorily cautious blind child at all. I used to just sort of run places figuring, I don't know, either would jump out of the way or I did it, I guess, I don't know.
Mm.
I'm grateful for the pieces of my brain that are still intact. But my mom, when she wanted to leave me a note, she would tape it to a piece of yarn and tape the yarn across the doorway so that when I came crashing in from the school bus, I would basically get clotheslined with whatever piece of information she wanted me to have. So just the braille is everywhere. But I think by and I like everybody else here, such a big advocate for tech, and I love tech, but I find myself sort of constantly deeply curious slash impatient because I wonder what we would be doing if we had the equivalent time and energy with our tech that sighted people have with their tech. Like, what would be the next step in Braille? How small can you make Braille and still read it? How big can you make Braille? Like, what would happen to our literacy if we had books with like larger Braille, jumbo Braille, and then small Braille, and sideways Braille? Like, what else can we do? And I'm always I was Segunda's you talk about noticing the texture of fabrics. Well, everybody could do that, and what else could we do, right? If we just had the freedom to push forth, the freedom and the resources to push forward and find what are the natural limits of touch and acoustics. Like, where could we be going if our community had the time and the resources to get together and just push those edges out like crazy? I'm wondering who has not answered this question. I think everybody has. Yep.
Yeah, I think we all
But-
did. I think we're on to Bobby.
So next we're going to talk about the misconceptions of blindness and ability. Another question that I think we could all wax poetically for quite a while about. I know I could, so I'll contain myself. And first, I'll just address that I think for a lot of folks, ability and blindness don't even go in the same sentence. And I think that proof is evident in a lot of like systems that exist that are not accessible to blind folks because they never expected us to show up. I think is that proof is evident in some of the mindsets of people that lots of us on this panel and other people kind of come across, where you kind of hear statements that's like, "Ooh, you didn't think I could do that, or you didn't think that was possible." And it also can be proven by just things that some of us blind and low vision people may even think about ourselves. And all of those can be kind of wrapped neatly into this phrase called ableism, or just thinking that people with disabilities are a little less than. And so I guess to not wax on so long about this concept of misconceptions about blindness and ability, I'll just say it's possible. And I think all of my fellow panelists are proof that there totally can be ability connected to blindness. I think a lot about my students at Lighthouse. Most of my students are folks that have just gone blind, like some as recently as this year, and they're figuring it out, right? Like they're doing the things that they still want to do. Um, Despite, and I say that in quotes, their blindness or their low vision. And so I think the concepts can totally go together just fine. And I'll end there. And I'll pass it to Min.
This is like Bobby said, this is a really big topic to unpack. And I think for me, the misconceptions of blindness really come down to, I think, fear for people. Because I think, I'm sure everybody on this panel has had a variation of, I wouldn't be able to be blind. I've had people say to me, I would rather die than be blind. Because people just equate blindness with just a total lack of ability and a total lack of being able to take care of oneself. Sherry's the linguistics professor, so I'll let her talk about the origins of the word blind. But even in our vocabulary, right? Like people say, replace the word blind for being unable to make intelligent decisions. Um, and so I think it comes down for me to fear in people, but also just this misconception that blind people are unintelligent somehow, that we don't know what we're doing, or what we're able to do on a daily basis. Sherry, since I talked about your linguistics background, maybe I'll pass it on to you. So,
Cool. This is such a big topic. So I'll give you the 30-second summary of the research paper. So linguists are interested in the meanings of words, of course, and the word blind in English means several different things, but none of them are brilliant, beautiful, or incredibly intelligent, right? None of those related meanings of the word blind are anything that you would want. Um, they're not positive, right? But so one of the things I thought that I would do with a group of colleagues, is we looked for the same kinds of meanings across languages. So we took a language sampling of languages from around the world, from all the different language families, widely spoken languages, languages with very few speakers. We just tried to do a nice spread out set, and we looked for the the shades of meaning of the word blind across languages. And we found this continuing trope of blind meaning ignorant, or blind meaning unthinking or unfeeling, across languages. So it's not just us. I mean, we're not going to just bust on English here for being that way. We also know from psycholinguistic research that the way that use words affects the way that you think. It's not that thing that they talk about with, you know, however many thousands of words for snow. They're supposed to be in quote Eskimo, which isn't even the name of language. Um, anyway, the answer to that question is about four from a linguistics perspective. The Inuit languages have about four words for different kinds of snow. But, it's not that thing either. But the way that you speak and the words that you use do affect the way that the kinds of things you remember and the kinds of things that you group together. So the fact that you use the word blind to mean ignorant does in fact affect the way you think about blind people. We can stick you in the laboratory and we can measure that. Um and so I think just to add on top of that, misconceptions about blindness, from my perspective, one of the things that I think about a lot is the emotional reality of being a disabled person in a non-disabled world, like walking through your life, feeling the psychological, spiritual impact of ableism on you every day. And I think that is not an aspect that people spend too much time thinking about. Um, so, uh, there's just everyone has their own sort of way of dealing with these things. Some people just suppress and pretend like it doesn't matter. Some people go into it a lot. Some people, some people are broken by the rage and the sadness of just being treated like either a doorstop or a paragon of ability. With very few things in between there, right? And it's a lot. And so I think that the reality that we have this whole range of life reactions to being a living being in a body that's different than other people's bodies. That's a big, powerful, strong thing. And some of it, like some of the friends here have said, some of it can result in you having cool insights and maybe more resilience. And some of it is just no fun. And I think those misconceptions that I think the most destructive thing about that, is that for someone who has to go through the very difficult journey of going from a sighted person to a blind person, which is a hell of a ride, um, there isn't, I think they think that they're supposed to have it all worked out really soon, or that they're never gonna have it worked out, and the fact that that's sort of a constant journey. Maybe you're not journeying toward accepting your blindness. I'm not sure that that's a thing that I worry about too much at my stage of blindness right now, but, uh, just accepting the way that you're treated in the world and figure out what are your hacks, what are your energy sources, how do you get by, in a day when you just really don't know when you go out into the world how you're going to be treated. Like, that was a kind of a wild random rant, I'm sorry. What about you, Chansey?
I loved it. I think the misconception that I want to talk about is the misconception that sighted people have about what's hard about blindness. When I'm going to the airport, and this is given that I've done some training and I've hung out with other blind people and I've learned a lot of skills. So I guess the first misconception, if you're newly blind or if you've been blind for a while and you're just thinking about things, if you don't think you could make it on your own across the street or through an airport or go pick up groceries and find a shopping assistant, it's probably not because 'cause you're bad at those things, it's probably because you haven't logged the experience hours. Like, if you're sighted and you grow up around sighted people, you go on hundreds of shopping trips, you cross streets with your school class tons of times, and everyone's doing it the same way. You go to the airport, you see how your family do it, and you're gonna be doing it pretty much that same way. If you are blind, hopefully you're surrounded by educators and friends and colleagues who can help you with that stuff, and you go do some skill building at some point. If you're newly blind, the number of hours that you really need to get good, and I know that good is a loaded word, so I'll just say good to your satisfaction, aren't really offered to you on a silver plate. You really have to self-advocate a lot more than you should have to get training out of most systems, and they won't tell you how much training it takes to get really comfortable. And so I often hear that my library patrons are being told, "Oh, you're done with mobility, congratulations." And they're freaking terrified. And they say, "I just don't think I'm a good traveler." So misconception number 1 is that it's you bad at blindness. No, the systems are pretty bad at blindness sometimes, and that's yet another reason we've got to surround ourselves with community who can help us calibrate what is possible and where to get services when it's not obvious, when your needs maybe aren't being met. And then the other misconception I think that sighted people have is about like what we worry about given we have those skills. Um, I'm not really worrying about whether I'll find my gate or my seat at the airport or when my little shrink wrapped cheese and crackers comes that I won't know how to open it. I'm not worried about any of that. I'm worried that the guy in security is going to ask my traveling companion, my professional colleague, "Oh, is she traveling with you?" and speak over my head. I'm worried that I might not be able to find the taxi stand as quickly because there's no accessible signage, even though there's a million techniques for making signage more accessible. Basically, I'm burning up my energy thinking about how to hack around people's behavior and the built environment, and it's not really the blindness itself that's the problem. It rarely comes up when I'm in an environment that I constructed for myself, whether that's at work or at home. But it sure does come up in interaction with other people. And the good news, the positive uh, takeaway for sighted people from that is that by just communicating clearly and kindly and offering options and listening to what people say, you can really change the way that someone's going to experience their day and their interaction with you. And you don't have to know a whole lot about blindness to do that. You just have to kind of be a cool human being and ask people what they need and take their answer. Suganda, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I have a couple, 3 points mostly that I want to talk about. Uh, well, as a person who has some vision, one of the misconceptions that people have is that your vision can be cured with all the technology that's there, and that your quality of life. And I think this is common for both totally blind people and people like me who are in between, is that our quality of life is heavily dependent on how much sight we have. And that quality of life is not just the personal quality of life. I think it's also, I'm referring to like the quality of work we do, or the quality of, I mean, I know that this kind of borrows on the broader ableism conversation, but I think it really does apply to a very wide spectrum of the blind community. So it's the biggest misconception that I go through often is people telling me different tantras and mantras and techniques and ointments and treatments that can cure my vision. Um, and I think that a lot of people assume that the work that I do or have been able to do or produce is largely because I have some vision. And I definitely don't borrow into that, because I think that all the work that we do and all the quality of life that we have is not dependent particularly based on how much sight we have or don't have. Rather, many other factors that come together to help us produce that work. So it's not one or the other things. It's just a compilation of many different things. The second big misconception that I think uh, I want to point out towards is just kind of how narrow narrowly people think about the spectrum of blindness. And as a cane user who sees much less outside. So my vision varies a lot based on the light. When there's bright sunny light, I can see much less than if I'm indoors in a much more controlled environment where maybe the light source is only pointing towards my work or my reading material or whatever. So that's another big one that I live on a day-to-day basis, where outside I'm really like any other blind person, using my cane, getting all the cues from the environment in terms of the sound and tactile cues. But indoors, I can see a lot more, and I have a lot more access to what's around me. And so a lot of times there's a lot of hostility when people are not literate in the spectrum of blindness as to uh, the diverse ways that people see the world and experience the world. Um, yeah, I mean, I think I covered all 3 points. They were kind of overlapping. So I think we can move on to the next subject.
I'd like to talk a little bit about inclusive design, and we were going to talk about Braille now, but I think we've sort of explored Braille a little bit. I will say, for anybody that's watching that's heard that maybe Braille is on the decline or that it's not as important because it's bulky and expensive, you have no idea how much Braille has innovated in a short time period. Braille just turned 200 years old. Print is like, I don't know, 5,000 years old. And in that 200 years, we've gotten to a point where we have digital Braille displays that can show one line at a time. You can carry around hundreds of books. I've got one right here. If you're in the US and you're eligible, you can get a free one through the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled. Thank you guys for permitting the infomercial. So Braille is super versatile, and I use it for taking notes, and I use it for labeling things. I'm into aeroponics, so I label all my little seed packets. I use it for reading notes. I use it for reading Braille subtitles so that I can quote unquote practice my Spanish by watching telenovelas on Netflix. Braille gives you this precision and immediacy and the ability to read in your own voice. And I won't say that it's the only non-visual literacy method that exists, because obviously it's not. But Braille is so versatile and so great in so many situations. More broadly, I think the takeaway I'd like to leave people with in terms of inclusive design is that all people want and deserve to move through spaces and experiences and environments under our own power, even if people are happy to help. By and large, we want at least the option to move freely throughout the world. And so things that help me do that, I perceive very favorably. I used to have mixed feelings when I was growing up about audible pedestrian signals because if you had the right skills, couldn't you just cross the street by listening to the traffic? And I now think everybody deserves to feel confident crossing the street, whether they're good at localizing sound or not. So, like, please put up that APS. It's great for everyone. It's an extra modality, and who doesn't want more information? Put the APS there. Put the braille signage there. Put the large print signage there. And when I think about more low tech inclusive design, thinking about communities of solidarity and people that want to help and aren't sure what to do and might not have a big budget, might not even be, you know, big D decision makers, asking people what their accommodation needs are and planning to be flexible and listening to what people say they need and being creative when needs arise last minute is always very welcome. Often I'm struck by being at a museum and somebody that just happens to be in the group with me describes something for me in a very evocative way. Or someone comes across the street to me to matter of factly say, hey, there's construction and everybody's diverted off the sidewalk in a couple seconds. Just heads up. Um, Information is a powerful thing, and offering your solidarity in a moment is a powerful thing, and it's something that anybody can do without prior experience. So, um, we don't all design environments, but we all design interactions. And those of us that do design environments, I think we can and should look for designs and design modalities that support people feeling oriented and confident as much as we possibly can. Let me pass it to Min.
This is a really big topic for me as well. But I want to take it maybe more personal experience for me and kind of dovetailing off of what Chancey was saying about building or like designing interactions that are inclusive. Um, and this goes into environments too. Like I have additional disabilities besides for blindness. Like I have a little bit of a hearing impairment. And so for me, I do have the training. I do have the good skills to travel independently. And I do. Um, but sometimes crossing streets are really difficult for me because I can't localize sounds. And so having audible pedestrian signals, having those tactile domes on the sidewalks to uh, line me up for a good street crossing. Uh, and all of the other environment designs that help blind low vision people travel more independently and confidently. I think all of those things we should all stand behind. And the same thing with audio descriptions for media and entertainment. Uh, I think a lot of focus is still very much on education and employment. And just thinking probably within the past 20 years or so, we really have uh, made it more of a priority for blind and low vision folks to be included in entertainment and pop culture. If we think about memes, like memes have been extremely inaccessible to us for a very long time until, or unless a friend describes it to us in really great detail. Um, but we deserve to be a part of the conversation. We deserve to be a part of the larger culture. And so that's what I think about when I think of inclusive design. It's like, how can you as an individual, how can you as a group, as a community, as an organization, what can you do in order to facilitate that access and think about everybody, not just a small group of people that may be able to enjoy something. And what about you, Sonda?
This is very close to my heart, and I have lots of things to say on this topic, but I'll try to stay more on the design and art side of it. So, when I think of design, and especially someone who practices multisensory design modalities in my own art practice, and I also teach a course called Sensory Design Studio. One of the things that I really encourage students and designers and also keep learning from myself is, first of all, like just having much better representation and learning from an authentic experience, because there's so much knowledge that is embedded in embodied experiences uh, that gets lost when we try to translate that from someone else's point of view. So I really think that designers really need to focus on, and design in general needs to be really borrowing from the expertise that's embedded in many different embodied experiences and knowledges that come from that experiences that are usually hugely undermined and not even acknowledged at times. The other thing is, I think, of course, there's a huge power for design to be inclusive. And again, it starts from representation, but I also advocate a lot for versatility. So, just by the virtue of an object being offered in multisensory formats, it by default creates much more access for many different lived experiences. And again, we can keep on making it more versatile by bringing in more perspectives, bringing in underrepresented bodies and minds to the forefront, so that we can try to address things that maybe are out of our purview, or our inherent biases, because we all have some kind of biases. So I think just making design that's more versatile and also multisensory and multimodal creates a better bridge, but also makes it more interesting. And then also audio descriptions are something that I want to advocate for here as well, because of course they're part of access, and of course they create a bridge between visuals and non-visual modes of acquiring that knowledge of the visual. But I think it also is such a great way of engaging with art or design. So for example, when I'm at a museum, and when I was in grad school, a lot of the information that I was learning was through a dialogue and discussion. And when you're with blind people and low vision people, that discussion is just so natural and organic, and kind of just default, and it just creates such a deep engagement with art. And really, whether or not you have sight, you really need to have that dialogue to understand what you're looking at, and to process what meaning that brings to the forefront. So I have a lot to say about this, but I'm gonna stop there, and if we have time, we can always revisit this subject later, and I'll pass it on to Bobby.
I love your mentioning of the bringing the visuals and the non-visual connection with the multimodalities of audio description. I mentioned earlier that I teach a class at SF State, and it is for TVIs and O&Ms that'll be working with K through 12 students. And when we talk about audio description, one of the things we connect it to is language development and concept development for kids who are low vision and blind. It also could totally apply to adults too. But one of the reasons that I love audio description is to bring in potentially new words and new concepts. So we showed the beginning of, I believe it was the Mario movie to our students this semester, and it talked about the shiitake mushrooms that are in the Mario thing. And that could be a great way that if you have students, again, we're talking about kids in this case who maybe have never seen a mushroom, who just don't know that particular, is it a species, a variation of mushrooms? It could be a great time that through watching a movie, through now you have that language to then talk about how you have all of these different types of mushrooms. And so now you can introduce them. If we tie it back to the previous question about all the different tactile things, like now you can bring into the classroom different types of mushrooms that they can feel, they can see the sizes, they can see the shapes. You can talk about the different colors if you want. Now you can bring it into a different type of lesson, and now you can do a lesson on knife skills, and now you're chopping. So I think audio description is really great in that it, of course, makes something that is inaccessible accessible, like it's describing the visual elements of a movie that don't have words, but it often is said in really great language because it only has a little bit of time to make the most of that description. So you get some fascinating word choices that even as an adult, sometimes I'm like, what does that mean? Um, so I love the richness of the language and how you can really use it as an opportunity to get words that you may often find in books. I think a lot of time you get that level of description of scenes. So that's one of my favorite things about audio description is how you can make some fun language invention from it. How about you, Sherry?
Thank you, Bobby. I think one of the things that I really enjoyed all these answers, and they're all such really great answers. And it really, I love what Chancey said about we all design interactions. I'm thinking about, hey, heads up, there's construction is a super useful way of enriching information, right? And that's something I really want to know. Hey, where are you going? Or where are you trying to go? Or are you lost? Or not greetings, right? So that's if you're going to design an interaction that is designed to make somebody feel irritated with you, are you lost or where are you trying to go is a super good way to design hostility or at least tiredness into your reaction. Um, but I think for me, the end call on why all of this matters. So much good stuff said here about kids and about people who are new to blindness. And I think one of the essential things, though, is that we are entering a period of severe global warming, and we just got done with a pandemic. And what that means is Earth is out there with a big, giant recruiting sign out for more disabled people. Right? There's not going to be less disabled people in the world going forward. Sure, there'll be some innovations, some healthcare stuff will improve, things, and yeah, maybe some technology will do this or that or the other thing. But in general, what we've learned from the pandemic is that our general disregard for the environment and our carelessness with one another means that we're going to have more disabled people, not fewer, going forward. And so, something that might not feel important to the average non disabled person walking down the street could become essential material out of nowhere. We are the only disability that it's super duper easy to join. Um, whether people wanna join us or not, lots of people are going to, and if we're all lucky enough to live a long time, our abilities will change, and we'll become disabled anyway, right? So this stuff is not a niche thing to think about for those disabled people over there who deserve inclusion. This is the inclusion of things like audio description and braille education and braille signage and auditory beacons for crossing streets. All of that is in everybody's best interest. And you don't even know whose best interest it's going to be in because you don't know who's going to become disabled later on. So the outreach aspect I think is super important, which makes me have questions about what it is we want people to do. So what are the best practices? What should sighted people know? And I personally, when I could fill many volumes with what I wish sighted people would know. Um, but I think it comes down to a couple things. Uh, I mean, obviously, you don't put your hands on another human's body without permission. I think we could all raise hands and agree about that. Nobody who touches me in public without my permission, whether they think they're just moving me or whatever they think they're doing, is my friend. That is, yeah, just no, just no. Keep your hands to yourself. And I think a lot about the courteously asked question as a good thing, but I also think about the fact that Google is everybody's friend. So if you if you notice a cook, this is just the crazy example that I came up with 2 seconds before turning on my computer today to talk to you guys. So, if I have a question about cooking, say I just really, 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 really gotta know how many tablespoons are in a cup. That's knowledge I don't have, and I really gotta know it. And I see a person who looks like a cook walking down the street, and maybe they look like the best cook, that I've ever seen, and maybe it's even a famous cook. They're just really good at cooking. I can tell that by how maybe by their hat or whatever. Like, I'm not gonna go up to that person and go, "Hey, how many tablespoons are in a cup?" I would be embarrassed to ask that question. I would quietly Google it. But if ah, yeah, I might have other things that I wanna say to that person. So, I think there are lots of really good resources out there on how to run a conference. Uh, you can Google there's always, 10 things I wish sighted people knew about blind people, and if we could all argue about what should be on that list, right? But Google is your friend, I would say, first off, and think about whether you want somebody asking that question about you, because we've all also had a lot of super intrusive, really weird questions that we all talk about. Non-disabled people are out of the room, like, "Do you know what that guy asked me? Oh my god." That we have that list that sort of just increases the weariness quotient. So I'm super interested in what the rest of you might have to say about best practices. And maybe Bobby, do you wanna take a stab at that?
So I am going to say what a lot of people usually don't say. So I'll first just acknowledge that we're all different. So what I say might not be what other people would say. And so that's tip number one. We're different. So there kind of isn't this one size fits all answer. We probably could all come up with a list of general things we might agree with, but there isn't a one or a group of answers. But the first thing I will say is you don't have to do anything. If you're a sighted person and you see a blind or low vision person, we are just people, probably just living. And the idea that there is something that is in need of doing is problematic in and of itself. You don't have to do a thing. You don't have to ask us if we need help. More than likely, 9.999 times out of 10, we have just been doing whatever we have been doing all day. We're just going to work, going to get a coffee, on the train, taking the dog out, having a phone call, at the doctor's, whatever you are doing, we're just living. As Chancey said earlier, we're just logging those experience hours where we already have those hours and we're doing what we need to do. And the fact that you think something needs to be done about whatever we're doing is probably cause for you to sit down and think about what you think about blind people. So the answer is nothing. However, if you still want to do something, realize that if we need something, which happens, I'm not going to deny that because the world isn't made accessible to us. Point number two. So if we need something, it's probably not our fault. Surprise. It's probably not blindness's fault. It's probably back to all those inaccessible things that we've talked about earlier. Probably because there should be a sign here or there should be something else. Um, we also have this locus of control that we can ask you. So now I'm back to my previous point of you probably also still don't have to do anything. But if you still decide that there's something you want to say or something to do, I am a huge advocate of consent. And so it's worthwhile to dive in with that head first. And so if you have a question, if you do have this curiosity and it's made it to your mouth before your Google, like Sherry recommended, it's always wonderful to just ask, like, I do have a blindness question. Are you open to that? So those would be kind of my tips. And I would just say, I think someone mentioned it earlier, just realize that these are encounters we are having all day, every day, where a lot of times, not everybody, because there's an exception and yada, yada, yada. Um, these are kind of how people are coming at us every day, all day. So if you can try to acknowledge that you're probably not the first. And so that weighs on how we interact or can weigh on how someone might interact with you. So be gentle. And so just acknowledge like that part and come in with, do you want to have this conversation with me about your personal experience? And give us a chance to opt into that conversation is appreciated by most. What do you think, Saganda?
I think Sherry and you have really covered a lot of ground, and I would just like to say just one point and emphasize just one point, and that is just get to know us. Just get to know, just form organic relationships and form synergetic bonds that are testimony of time rather than just transactional and extractive and have an end goal, because once you start forming organic relationships that don't really have an end goal. You'll learn a lot more, and not just about the person in question, but also about yourself. And that's really what we need. We need to humanize and normalize all the different lived experiences that are on this earth. So, yeah. And Chansey, I'll pass it on to you.
I'll just add on thematically to what you two have said. You know, number one, if you have a question for me that's about something other than blindness and you're a stranger chasing me down on the street, I'm so excited. I was out walking recently and some guy from across the street was like, ma'am, can I ask you a question? And I just keep walking, like straight in my face, like, I'm not ma'am, am I? And I know I am, ma'am. Because I'm expecting some kind of a blindness question. Maybe it's going to be something about my dog. And when he finally tracked me down, he was like, "You've got the same headphones I have, Aftershocks. Do you know where to buy a charger?" And I was just so excited that somebody was initiating a random interaction that didn't have to do with some blindness street question. So, yes, if you have a loved one who is blind or low vision and trying to figure out how to do something, I have an exception for you, but lead with that. Like, hey, can I ask you a question? I have a brother, I have a niece, I have whatever, because I have a deeper well for you if you're getting information to someone else who firsthand needs it. Just please lead with that. Um, I don't think any of us want people to be scared to ask questions, but some of us are in the field working in this area of inquiry all day, and even those of us that aren't, we've heard all the questions before, so help us triage them. It's nice.
So when it comes to best practices for sighted folks interacting with Black people, I have a lot of best practices, but I think it really just boils down to I think having humility and being able to know that you don't have the answers, that you're not the expert in the lived experience of Black people. And so ask a lot of questions. Um personally, I don't mind questions at all. I think it comes from a place of curiosity. Um, I mean, a lot of times people will ask really invasive questions. And that's not okay. But if their questions come from a place of curiosity, of learning, of bettering oneself in order to be, uh, just a better human being and a better ally to our community, I'm all for it. Um, and going along with asking questions is listening. I've seen a lot of instances where people, ask questions, but they don't actually listen. I think that's the most important part of this equation is you're asking the question, be willing to listen to uh, the experts, the people that are actually living this life and know exactly what they need and uh, their access needs. Um, so asking questions, listening, and I just really want to quickly emphasize what I think Chancey and Bobby were saying with the incidental learning. A lot of blind kids don't get that. They don't get that visual access to information that so many sighted kids do. And so as an individual, if you can provide that information to a blind person, to a blind friend in a really respectful and accessible, inclusive way, please do that. I can't tell you how much it means to me when I go on social media and I see a friend including a really great image description to their photos without me even asking. You know, blind people and disabled people in general, I think they have to do a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of like emotional work, emotional labor in order to get the access that we want and need and deserve. So when it happens organically like that, it's so amazing. And just, even daily interactions on the street, when I get somebody who's really respectful of me and my bodily autonomy, that goes a long way.
Thank you all so much for joining me for this panel, and I'd like to thank the organizers of the Disability Unite Festival for putting this together. and putting it in our hands. And thank you to everybody that watched and built solidarity with us. We'd love to hear from you and have a happy Pride Month.